You're listening to The Globalists, first broadcast on the 4th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
주문, 피청구인 대통령 윤석열을 파면한다.
Guilty. That's the verdict in South Korea as the Constitutional Court voted to remove the president from office. We'll cross to Seoul for more. The Gulf states have opposed a potential US strike on Iran. As tension increases, is conflict inevitable? Then, can the EU and Central Asian countries come to a deal to diversify from China and Russia? We'll check in with the conference in Uzbekistan. Plus,
we have taken a huge bunch of talent all around Europe to assemble a real missile that will be delivered with a fraction of the price and with hundreds or even thousands of times higher in quantity.
Drone development in Estonia. We'll hear about the defence tech boom in the country. We'll have a wrap-up of the Watches and Wonders event in Geneva, a flick through the papers from our Zurich studio, and a roundup of theatre news. And finally, Andrew Muller will share the wisdom he's gathered from events this week on What We Learned. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Hundreds of thousands of Gazans are fleeing as Israeli forces push deeper into Rafah. The city is now part of a security zone Israel plans to control. Countries around the world are warning of a trade war with the US after President Trump announced sweeping tariffs. There are fears prices will rise sharply for American consumers. And Denmark's Prime Minister wants stronger Arctic defence ties with the US during a visit to Greenland. She also rejected US plans to annex the semi-autonomous Danish territory. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, the South Korean Constitutional Court has unanimously voted to remove President Yoon Suk Yeol from office following his controversial declaration of martial law last December. This marks only the second time in the nation's history that a president has been impeached and removed. A new presidential election must now be held within 60 days. I'm joined now by Robert E. Kelly, who's a professor of political science at Pusan National University. Robert, thanks for coming on the show. What were the specific reasons? What were the specific reasons for the decision to remove President Yoon from office?
That his effort to declare martial law didn't meet the constitutional requirement. The Constitution says you can declare martial law. He also didn't do it procedurally the way you're supposed to. He didn't consult the legislature. But the core issue is that the Constitution says you can declare martial law in the case of a major national emergency. That's not actually spelled out in the Constitution what that means, but it's always been understood to mean either A, North Korean invasion, or B, some kind of massive natural catastrophe, like a hurricane or a tornado or something like that. And neither of those things happened. The former president, declared martial law because of divided government, which is to say that he was facing an opposition-dominated legislature, which was blocking his agenda. And, the court concluded that he just wildly overreacted. And I think that's broadly what the sentiment here is in South Korea.
And how's the ruling been received by the public and the media?
Well, it's been 4 hours. It's now 3 p.m. here in South Korea. And, I'm watching the news and looking out the window and stuff like that. And you don't see people rioting or anything like that. I mean, there's no smoke in the air or anything like that. I think the pro-Yoon demonstrators, right, there have been, the former president has a lot of support. I'd say about a third of the country is really sort of hard right, really committed to him, and they will reject the legitimacy of this ruling. They have a couple days, I suppose. It's a Friday afternoon. They have basically the weekend, I suppose, to go on the streets and really make a fuss if they're really going to fight over this. But they're not doing as best I can tell. I mean, sure, there'll be a lot of op-eds and whatnot in the newspapers and stuff like that. But, the clock is ticking, right? If this is going to be in some way contested or unwound or challenged or whatever, the street action's got to occur, and so far it's not. In part because the police presence is massive.
Right. So, I mean, as you said, nothing out there. So the security measures which were put in place were not really necessary.
Well, I would imagine that it was prophylactic, right? Which is to say that I think if you didn't have something like a kind of quasi-military presence in Seoul right now, you would in fact probably have that rioting. I mean, some of the president's supporters were pretty militant. I mean, some of the language out there for the last month or so was pretty aggressive. And so that's why I think you had this response. So I think it's good. And I think they should probably leave them out there at least through the weekend. Again, I mean, people don't have to work tomorrow. So, who knows what's going to happen on the streets. I mean, this is the time to fight if his people are going to do that.
And in terms of his people, how numerous are they?
I would say about 25% to a third of the country is pretty hard right, genuinely committed to the idea that he has been President Yoon, or former President Yoon, has been railroaded or has in some way had the presidency taken away from him illegitimately by left-wing judges or something like that. It's not a majority. I do think the majority, certainly the polling has suggested that a general majority of the country thinks he overstepped his authority. But I mean, there's a definite hard right core here that sees this as sort of like, a communist-inspired North Korean manipulation and stuff like that. There's a lot of conspiracies on the South Korean right on YouTube.
And what impact will his removal have on South Korean politics?
Well, in the short run, there's got to be a new presidential election. The Constitution requires another election within 60 days. So today is April 4. That means, I guess, by June 4. President Yoon was a conservative, which means the South Korean left, the progressives, will almost certainly win. Given how egregious the president's overstepping was, the court decision against him was unanimous. I would imagine that the South Korean left will win pretty big. I would imagine the majority will be probably 53, 55, maybe even greater. And I think the real impact then is going to be felt on the right. This is the second South Korean conservative president who's been impeached, and that says a lot about the South Korean Conservative Party. It's not well institutionalized. It's not good at candidate recruitment, candidate grooming, right? I mean, 2 presidents in a row who are removed is pretty bad record. And so I think the South Korean right's looking at several years in the wilderness while they get their act together. And
as far as the left goes, what names are rising to the top for the election?
Yeah, so there was an election in 2022, and the primary left-wing candidate lost because there was a factional left-wing candidate that pulled away 3% from him. If the left hadn't split, he would have won. His name is Lee Jae-myung. He seems to be the front runner. Again, I mean, all this is new, right? It's just 4 hours old. But I think the general consensus is that he's the front runner. He has had some corruption stuff thrown at him, so maybe there'll be some kind of competitor inside a primary. But my guess is that he will sort of run and win, that he'll probably be the next president.
And of course, this isn't the end of Yoon's criminal trials. He's got to stand up for insurrection charges too.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not a lawyer, so I wonder. I can't speak too much to the details of what that might look like. But my sense is politically is that I wonder if that's going to continue. I wonder if you're going to see a kind of Richard Nixon kind of scenario where once Nixon actually resigned the presidency in the face of an impeachment threat during Watergate, Nixon kind of went home. He sort of went back to California and sort of wrote his books, and he kind of, just faded into the background. And I think that might be an alternative here. The most important thing has been done. The president has been removed. The decision was unanimous. There's pretty widespread consensus that he overstepped. He's already 70 years old. People are talking about sending him to jail for the rest of his life, or maybe even the death penalty. And that just strikes me as overkill. His career is over. He's never going to come back. He's been disgraced. Just let him go, fishing or something like that for another decade. I don't know. But it depends. I would encourage the South Korean left not to overread this, right? Not to read this as like an effort to sort of crush the right, because, the country's pretty polarized and that doesn't help. So.
Yeah. I wonder how this political crisis will affect South Korea's international relations.
My own sense is not too much, actually, right? I mean, lots of democracies have crises and scandals and failures and sort of ridiculous politicians who do silly things, right? I mean, what matters, of course, is how the institutions respond. And I think South Korea's institutions have responded remarkably well. I mean, if you look at the United States, I think the response to Donald Trump's challenges has been really, really depressing, right? I mean, but in South Korea, the institutions and civil society responded really well. People hit the streets within a couple hours of the martial law announcement. The Conservative Party today, before the announcement, said it would respect the Constitutional Court's ruling. You know, the Republican Party in the United States has not respected the courts when it's come to challenges to Donald Trump. So I think South Korea's institutions have held up pretty well in the face of genuinely deep polarization. South Korea is pretty polarized, which is one of the reasons why I have those guys on the street. But I think broadly speaking, South Korea's institutions have worked out pretty well. And North Korea hasn't done anything. You know, it's been 4 months since the martial law, and now North Korea hasn't done anything or challenged them at the border or anything like that.
Robert, I can't let you go without asking you about your nickname, which is BBC Dad.
Right.
So
I'm a rock star, man. I'm a celebrity in Britain.
So you were famously interrupted by your small daughter while you were on live television. I just have to ask, how is she? How old is she now? And does she know about her fame?
They do. My kids are now, at the time it happened, my kids were 9 months and 4. They are now 12 and 9. So, yeah, they're grown up. I put stuff on Twitter every once in a while, and people say, I can't even recognize them anymore because everybody remembers that video. So, and yes, they are aware that they are famous. You know, my daughter knows her little dance, and sometimes she gets asked to sort of do that at school, and she gets all embarrassed. But, yes, thank you for asking.
And what do they think about Yoon Suk Yeol?
Oh, my kids? Oh, they don't know. I told them, Korea is very polarized. My wife and I told them today when they go to school, don't talk about it at all. You know, you never know who you're going to talk to.
Robert, thank you very much indeed. That's Robert E. Kelly, also known as BBC Dad. He was on the line from Seoul. This is The Globalist. It's 9:11 in Riyadh, 7:11 here in London. The US and other Western powers accuse Iran of having a clandestine agenda to develop nuclear weapons capability by enriching uranium to a high level of fissile purity, above what they say is justifiable for a civilian atomic energy program. Tehran says its nuclear program is wholly for civilian energy purposes. During Donald Trump's first term, he unilaterally withdrew from the Obama administration's 2015 nuclear accord with Iran. Now, he wants to force them back to the table, but Tehran won't negotiate directly with Washington. On Sunday, Trump threatened to bomb the country if Tehran did not come to an agreement. This has alarmed the Arab monarchs of Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the UAE, who've refused to assist with military operations that target Iran. And now there's evidence that Washington is amassing B-2 bombers at the Diego Garcia base in the Indian Ocean. So is a military strike inevitable? Well, I'm joined now by Burcu Özçelik, who is a senior research fellow at the Middle East Security at RUSI. Burcu, why won't Iran negotiate with the US?
Well, for the time being, Iran is sending a message through various intermediaries, but most recently back channels through Oman, that it is in fact ready to negotiate, but do so indirectly. So the Iranian regime has turned down the offer to talk directly with the United States. And I think there the motivation is that they don't want to be sort of bullied, pressured, humiliated potentially. I mean, Iranian officials have pointed to the experience of President Zelensky in the Oval Office. And so the Iranians are trying to assert their own terms over how the talks, if they do happen, should unfold. And the issue, of course, is that the tensions are really ratcheting up at the moment with serious military buildup in the Gulf, in the Middle East, and all signs seem to be pointing towards a potential military strike against Iranian military, nuclear or command centers.
But the Gulf wants no part of it. What have they said about possible US actions?
So the Gulf states have a very delicate relationship with Iran. They have been, unlike in the past during the first Trump administration, the Gulf states have entered into a period of rapprochement or normalization with Iran. And Iran views the Arab states of the Persian Gulf as pivotal to their efforts to deter Israel and America from attacking key targets in Iran. So Iran has been pressuring the Gulf to deny U.S. or Israel access to their airspace for any retaliation against Iran. But the Gulf states have been quite firm in their messaging in that they seek de-escalation, They are not supportive of military strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, which would have knock-on effects, repercussions for the Gulf states in terms of attacks on their gas and oil export facilities, as well as contamination in the Gulf, which the Qatari prime minister pointed to last weekend. And so there's a real concern among the Gulf states that they do not want this to go ahead and refuse to allow access to their airspace for Israeli or U.S. strikes against Iran.
And will the Gulf states' position embolden Iran?
It certainly sends the right kind of messaging that Iran wants to express to the United States, that, first of all, Iran is open to indirect talks, and the diplomatic channel, whilst very narrow, has not closed down from the Tehranian point of view, and also that the Gulf states are sort of backing the Iranian position, that they are ready to mediate. In fact, there are sort of reports that Saudi Arabia has not only offered, but is insisting that they mediate between Iran and the United States for indirect talks. So as the Gulf states rally behind diplomacy and a negotiated settlement to this conflict, the Iranian position is somewhat strengthened vis-a-vis the U.S. insistence on the keeping this potential of a military strike alive.
I wonder if you could tell us more about the possible U.S. preparations for a strike, particularly around Diego Garcia.
Yes, so there has been reports of a buildup, particularly of B-2 stealth bombers, or sort of known as bunker-busting bombs, which the U.S. does not have a great supply of. These are expensive equipment, and there's been a buildup in Diego Garcia. Over the weekend, Iranian officials close to the supreme leader, Khamenei, declared that they would consider any Gulf involvement in strikes emanating from the airbase as a declaration of war. And so this is and Iran also subsequently said that they were considering preemptive strikes against the joint U.S.-UK base in the Diego Garcia base. And so there have been then questions about the tactical feasibility of whether Iranian ballistic missile long-range strikes would be able to reach the base. But there are workarounds, potentially, that Iran could use to deter this kind of strike that could emanate from Diego Garcia. And the big question is whether the U.S. right now is sort of trying to create leverage or bluffing by building up this military assets in the region, or whether this indicates a real commitment to scale up and actually go ahead with military strikes. The issue is, of course, is that there's a cost associated with moving this military infrastructure, these assets into the region. And so that could be a real indicator of the validity, of the strength of the potential of attacks.
So Russia said yesterday that threats of military strikes against its ally, Iran, were unacceptable. They warned that attacking the Islamic Republic could lead to potentially catastrophic results if nuclear installations were bombed. Now, Russia and Iran signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement in January. I wonder if that includes mutual defence. Would striking Iran automatically involve Russia?
It wouldn't automatically involve Russia, and the Iranians, whilst they have in place this strategic partnership with Russia, and they value that because it indicates that Iran is not as diplomatically isolated on the international stage as the United States often casts it to be, there is no automatic clause in this agreement similar to the collective defense doctrine in the NATO architecture that would mean that Russia rushes to Iran's aid. And the Iranians are somewhat skeptical of the Russians' involvement in this, have not sought out Russia's role in mediating with the United States. So there is some skepticism there on the Iranian side. But what Russia is doing, as well as the Gulf states, is trying to de-escalate the tensions right now, create enough pressure on the Trump administration to walk back from this. And there could be, in fact, a timeline of potentially 2 months. This has been floated as what Trump offered in the letter that he sent to Iran, that negotiations take place over a period of a time-bound period of 2 months. But again, the language there was very much found to be not acceptable from the point of view of the Iranian regime, in that they refuse to negotiate under fire or be bullied or pressured. And so this points to a real impasse at the moment. But yes, Russia's statement there indicating that there is really no interest or support for these types of attacks at this time against Iran, because the consequences could be very dire for the region as well as globally, particularly if energy prices are impacted by a retaliatory attack by Iran against Gulf assets, against GCC energy assets.
Burcu, thank you very much indeed. That's Burcu Özçelik there. Now, still to come in the programme.
We learned that, among other things, money may shortly not be able to buy in America is everything.
Monocle's Andrew Muller tells us what we learned this week. This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's 7:21 here in London. This is The Globalist. I'm Georgina Godwin, and Juliet Linley is on the line from our Zurich studio. She is a journalist and broadcaster, and she's here to have a look at today's newspapers. Good morning to you, Juliet.
Guten Morgen, Georgina, from Zurich.
Let's start off in Italy. What is the story you have for us from Corriere della Sera?
Yeah, well, a lot of the press are covering, of course, the effects of the tariffs on whether it's coffee makers or winemakers. But I think we've all had a lot of news about tariffs over the last 2 days. So I wanted to instead focus on women. And I know you're gonna be interested in this piece of news as well, Georgina. So following the murders of 2 female university students this week, there have been calls for a cultural rebellion in Italy. So it's a very sad state of affairs, Georgina. These 2 were murdered or found murdered within 48 hours of each other. And this is when the number of femicides in Italy is already at 11 since January, since this year. So one of the students is Sara Campanella, 22-year-old biomedical student in Sicily. She was stabbed at a bus stop, and her ex-boyfriend has already admitted to killing her and to having harassed her since she started university. And separately, Ilaria Sula, same age, studying at Rome University, was found dead in a suitcase out of town and stabbed to death, possibly by her ex. Now, these insane killings, if you want, Georgina, have sparked protests in several Italian cities, Rome, Messina, and others. And further events are planned. And of course, it's renewed debate at a political level. So there's a whole debate about violence against women in Italy. Last year, there were 113 femicides, of which 99 were committed by partners, ex-partners, or relatives. So we have Mara Carfagna on the right. She's a politician, and she was a showgirl who, under Berlusconi, she became actually female Minister of Defense. And she was actually a very good Minister of Defense, despite perhaps some sort of prejudice against her because of her past as a showgirl. But she's calling for a cultural rebellion, saying that from a regulatory perspective, Georgina, Italy is more advanced than other countries, but not culturally. So this is the thing. And for the record, last month, Giorgia Meloni, by the way, Italy's first female premier, approved a draft law which for the first time in Italy introduced a legal definition of femicide in criminal law, punishing it with life sentences and ramping up sentences for crimes including revenge porn, sexual violence and stalking. And then, of course, it all sort of has to start at a very young age with educating youngsters. So there are calls, of course, in schools in Italy to boost their education on equality, women's rights, especially in a country that's known for its sort of patriarchal hierarchy, still very much prevailing in the south, in places like Sicily.
Now, Juliet, you are a former Vatican correspondent. So who's running the Holy See with the Pope on sick leave for a couple of months?
So the Pope came out of hospital 2 weeks ago. He'd been in hospital for 38 days, and his doctors subsequently said that on 2 occasions he was very much on death's door, and he was sort of brought back from the brink very dramatically. So now he is on a 2-month hiatus. He's resting at the Vatican. He's not having any meetings, public meetings. He's not having any audiences. And this is at a time when it's the Jubilee year for the Catholic Catholic Church. 2025 is a Jubilee year. There are so many events linked to the Jubilee. So many millions of pilgrims have planned to come to Rome to see the Pope, and he's out of commission at least sort of until mid-May, Georgina. So what's going on behind the scenes? Well, it does appear that he is still very much running the show. So Vatican Secretary of State Pietro Parolin told the press that the Pope is still very much connected to the Church. He's serving the faithful, and the Holy See has confirmed that he's regularly meeting with his closest collaborators. So the Holy See is saying that, he spends every day, spends part of it at his desk. He celebrates Mass every day in his private chapel in this residence of Santa Marta, where he is living behind Vatican walls. And now here are the key things that the 88-year-old's done this week. He cleared the path to confirmation for the first saints coming from Venezuela and Papua New Guinea. And at the same time, later this month, there will be the canonization, so the making of a saint of a teenager who was sort of a gamer. And that's an interesting event that we're all looking forward to. It doesn't look as if the Pope will be celebrating that event. But he's already, Georgina, he's already one of the oldest popes in history. So this is a bit of a crossroads. And although his recovery, has sort of gone beyond doctors' expectations. It's surpassed doctors' expectations. And they say he's expected to recover 90 to perhaps 100% of his previous health. I mean, this isn't the Francis of 12 years ago when he came into office. And there's still a lot of reforms that he has to carry out.
Yeah. Julia, I want to sort of end really where we began, vaguely talking about incels, this involuntary celibate movement, or men that hate women, because the Netflix show Adolescence has that as in the middle of it. It's hugely popular, and now online parental communities are pushing to get their kids offline because of the show.
Exactly. So, yes, I watched Adolescence because it stars a 13-year-old boy called Jamie who murders a schoolgirl of his age, and we have a 13-year-old son called Jamie. So I watched it with him with very, very great intention to make sure it's like, do not ever, go online and the whole Andrew Tate thing and the whole incel. So this is a story. It's a British-based article that was in the New York Times, and it's talking about parents forming online communities, let's say it. So there is a good side to online and to WhatsApp groups and everything. And they sort of want to delay giving smartphones to children even up till the age of 16. Now, I don't know how old your children or child was when they got their smartphones, but it's getting younger and younger, Georgina, and parents are under so much pressure. And you know what it is also? A lot of parents who are separated, they kind of give the child a phone so they can call their child directly rather than having to go through their ex-partners. But this is just opening up such an enormous can of worms. There's so much, the addictive qualities of the smartphones on the one hand, then there's the impact of social media on mental health, and as you say, the whole misogyny, incel that can bring about what's happening in Italy with so many femicides. So they've managed to put together a lot of parents, and I think it's 124,000 parents have joined this grassroots movement, sort of a smartphone-free childhood, and it's spread to 13,000 British schools. Now, the thing is, though, Georgina, they're looking at getting smartphones out of schools. I mean, there are some schools that have already banned them long ago, but kids are only in school for 7 hours a day. What about the other 17 hours when they're either on their way back from school or just at home? And it's such a battle to just keep them off those phones.
And as they say in Adolescence, he was in his bedroom. We thought he was safe.
With his teddy bears on his bed, right? Yep.
Yeah. Juliet, thank you very much indeed. That's Juliet Linley there from our Zurich studio. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Hundreds of thousands of fleeing Gazans have sought shelter in one of the biggest mass displacements of the war, as Israeli forces advanced into the ruins of the city of Rafah, part of a newly announced security zone they intend to seize. Yesterday, an Israeli airstrike killed at least 27 Palestinians, including women and children, inside a school building that served as a shelter for displaced families in Gaza City, local health authorities said. The Israeli military said the attack hit key Palestinian terrorists. US President Donald Trump offered support to French far-right leader Marine Le Pen after a Paris court earlier this week convicted her and 24 figures from her National Rally Party of embezzling European Union funds. In a social media post late on Thursday, Trump called the case against Le Pen a witch hunt whilst praising the far-right leader. And countries around the world threaten to ratchet up a trade war with the United States as Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs ignited fears of steep price increases in the world's largest consumer market. That could jack up the price for US shoppers of everything. A high-end iPhone, for instance, could cost nearly $2,300 if Apple passes the costs on to consumers. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. The European Commission's Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa, President of the European Council, travelled to Samarkand in Uzbekistan yesterday for the first ever EU Central Asia summit. They're meeting with the leaders of the Central Asian bloc, which also includes Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan. It's a packed agenda with diversifying trade exchanges away from Russia and China and boosting diplomatic ties all up for discussion. Well, joining me now is Reed Standish, China Global Affairs correspondent at Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. Reed, many thanks for joining us. What solutions can Central Asia provide to Europe over dependence on Russian oil?
Central Asia is a very resource-rich region, particularly, Kazakhstan has a ton of hydrocarbons, a lot of oil, a lot of gas. Some of the other countries also have large gas deposits. So it is there as a large energy consumer. And then the region is also super rich with critical minerals, which, of course, have been something making headlines a lot all around the world that go into, the building blocks for smartphones, microchips, all of those kind of things. So the EU, I think, has its eyes on those things, and it's looking to invest into the region also to create some trade corridors to bring those things more easily to the European market.
And what can the Central Asian nations hope to gain?
Well, I think they're really after investment. If you are a Central Asian government, you are largely dependent economically and politically right now on Beijing and Moscow. So they are looking for some way to kind of balance away from that. And I think Europe offers that in that regard. And also that, the European market, the EU is already the largest source of foreign direct investment inside Central Asia as a total. And we've already seen some investment put on the board with this summit. About 20 minutes ago, von der Leyen tweeted that they've announced a new $12 billion euro investment. And that's largely, I think, going into these trade corridors that they're trying to create, into railways, highways, ports, and all of that to make those trade links a lot easier between Central Asia, which can bring goods both from China and from itself to Europe.
And how can Brussels avoid charges of hypocrisy, given that they're considering striking deals with regimes which are accused of being authoritarian in Russia's vicinity? And also, of course, it involves a certain amount of sanctions busting.
Yeah, well, I think that a good way to understand this summit, why it's happening now. It's in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine. And I think that Brussels has seen, both Moscow's influence go down, but also China's influence rise there. And especially how China did that was through what is called its Belt and Road, which was this big infrastructure investment where hundreds of billions of dollars were poured into infrastructure. So Brussels has its own version of that it launched back in 2021 called the Global Gateway. And that's part of the vehicle that it's using here. And this is really supposed to be what officials have said to me in the past. This is the more pragmatic approach that Brussels is going to do, and to see maybe this is a way to create some goodwill, and perhaps later, to talk about those issues of democratization, human rights, which I shall mention, I have seen a draft agenda for the conclusions. There is some mention of civil rights organizations. But I think that there's also a recognition right now, given the state of the world, that if Brussels only goes around preaching its values, it's simply not going to be seen as an effective player in these parts of the world where you realistically have to do business right now.
Reed, thank you very much indeed. That's Reed Standish there, China Global Affairs correspondent at Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. You're with Monocle Radio. Geneva, the world's watchmaking capital, has been playing host to Watches and Wonders this week, the international trade fair for timepieces and jewellery. Monocle's fashion director, Natalie Teodosi, reports.
The watch industry has always been associated with a degree of conservatism, and rightly so. This is a sector run by heritage luxury houses whose stories span centuries. They remain deeply invested in safeguarding craft traditions and collectively eschew novelty in favor of design icons from their archives. Still, the best watch brands have always made room for creativity. And at this year's Watches and Wonders Fair in Geneva, there was an even bigger appetite for rule-breaking, creative experimentation, and the right dose of humor. The reason for the mood shift? The state of affairs globally calls for some lightheartedness and escapism, or at least that was how it was explained to me. It's an optimistic view of the world, says Catherine Renier, the newly appointed CEO at Van Cleef & Arpels, pointing to the house's new watch depicting lovers kissing on a bridge. The technique is always at the service of the story, she adds. At Piaget, bold ornamental stones and one-of-a-kind sautoir from the 1960s and 1970s recalled stories of Yves Piaget encouraging his team to do what had never been done before and propose new ways of wearing time, incorporating the dials within cuff bracelets and necklaces. This was a period of revolution, liberation, freedom of expression. And we try to hold on to that spirit, says Stéphanie Civrier, creative director of Piaget, about the rising popularity of the brand's mid-century designs, which marry the arts of high jewelry and watchmaking. Elsewhere, brands associated with sportier silhouettes have also found ways to experiment, primarily with bolder color. Hublot celebrated 20 years of its Big Bang model with colored ceramic styles, while Tag Heuer turned the spotlight back to its Formula One Solargraph, updated in bright shades of blue, yellow, and green. Luxury is something abstract. We have to free ourselves. There's too much focus on pricing, says Antoine Pan, Tag Heuer CEO, commenting on the new Solargraph, as well as this growing need to be more audacious, both in design and business. In a tougher market, production costs continue to rise and Swiss watch exports were down at the start of 2025. It's refreshing to see watchmakers getting more creative, breaking rules and daring to surprise their customers rather than playing it safe. Along the way, they've also reimagined the watch from utilitarian item to precious design object, where time is only for the wearer. That might be the ultimate modern luxury.
Thanks to Monocle's fashion director, Natalie Teodosi. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents around the world, do sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. One of the lessons of the war in Ukraine is that drones have become important weapons in modern warfare. They're cheap to manufacture, easy to operate, and shooting them down using traditional anti-aircraft weapons is costly. Defence companies are racing to develop effective low-cost solutions to defend against drones. One promising player is the Tallinn-based Frankenberg Industries, one of the many new defence tech startups that Estonia boasts. We dispatched our Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsoff across the Gulf of Finland to Tallinn to find out more. He brings us this report.
This 3D printing room on the top floor of a high-rise in Tallinn's Ülemiste district is an unlikely sight for a revolution in modern warfare. The machine, about the size of an ordinary office printer, is churning out parts to what Frankenberg Technologies, named one of Estonia's most promising defense startups, believes will change drone warfare.
in Ukraine. We can see it every single month where hundreds and thousands of Shaheds that are the most famous ones are launched against Ukraine, and there are no credible solution how to take them down with. So this is what we are dealing with. We are bringing the same missiles. We are reducing the price of those missiles by the factor of at least 10, and this is something that allows us to manufacture them in mass, meaning not in hundreds or few hundreds a year like the current incumbents are doing, because it's also rocket science. It's a difficult thing to do. So we make them a little bit simpler. We use the commercial off-the-shelf appliances. We use sensors that are readily available in your mobile phones and everywhere else. We have taken a huge bunch of talent all around Europe to assemble a real missile that will be delivered with a fraction of the price and with hundreds or even thousands of times higher in quantities. And this is what we see will be the dominant future solution against the counter unmanned aerial vehicle threat that is actually threatening all of us, because we know what the range and manufacturing capability of Russians are.
That was the company's CEO, Kusti Salm. Were it not for the missile parts lying around the office, this space could be mistaken for any other relaxed startup office in the world, with the young staff wearing slippers, joking around and speaking multiple languages. Yet here the sense of purpose is very palpable. The war in Ukraine has been personal to the Estonians, who suffered through half a century of Soviet occupation. Frankenberg's office overlooks Tallinn's main airport, which the Soviet forces occupied in the Second World War, and whose Stalinist former main building, built by the occupiers, still stands as a stark reminder of what is at stake for most Estonians.
I loved it on your website. You said that you are in the rocket science business, which you are, and we are actually standing next to, I believe this is a mock-up of your rocket that you are able to produce. So, we're not talking about massive rockets here. This is like half a meter long, about 5-6 centimeters thick.
Patriots, Stingers, Mistrals, that are almost household names in every European family after the Ukrainian war. These are the missiles, and we are developing similar stuff here, and this is what our team is doing here in our office in Tallinn, is the launcher system, the guidance system, everything that is non-lethal. Everything that is not associated with something that can blow up. This is something we do somewhere else.
So your rockets, you're testing them where they should be tested, right, on the battlefield?
Clearly, we since the inception of the company, we set up our Ukrainian subsidiary right away. And actually, by today, we are almost an European company by design, which is our deliberate strategy. We're already established in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, with actual people, actual offices, actual development work. We will be in UK. It's in the process now, so we will finalize this in short time. And we have development plans and exciting news coming up in upcoming weeks and months.
Next, to get a better understanding of how drones are changing warfare and how technologies such as Frankenberg's might fit into this transformation, I headed to Estonia's leading think tank on defense and security.
I'm Tony Lawrence. I'm the head of the Defence Policy and Strategy Programme at the International Centre for Defence and Security in Tallinn, Estonia. In this war, the Russian war in Ukraine, obviously the large-scale use of drones is something that's really unprecedented. And they've played kind of important decisive roles on the battlefield in tactical sense. But like most military technology, they've not been game-changing in a strategic sense. The outcome of the war has not changed. Nobody's won the war because of the use of drones, and this is a kind of fairly typical pattern throughout history of how technology is adopted in warfare, how the adversary then finds a way to counterbalance that adoption of technology. And so you have these cycles. And that's where we are in Ukraine with drones, very rapid innovation cycles of the use of drone technology.
How significant are these technologies if we are able to sort of produce on a large scale anti-drone technology sort of at a similar cost to what actual drones cost to produce. Would that be a potential game changer in the combat field?
Well, it wouldn't be a game changer as such because, as we talked about earlier, that game changing in war is actually a very, very difficult thing to achieve, and there's always a response to any innovation you may make yourself from your adversary. But certainly this is important. I mean, a first-person view drone can cost maybe a few $100s, a few €100. A missile, you're talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of euros, and you don't want to use that to take out a 500 euro zone that's been assembled in somebody's garage. So, of course, cheaper solutions are always good to look for. I guess the challenge for these cheaper solutions is because the innovation cycle is so rapid, they also need to keep up with that same innovation cycle and need to have product that can adapt or be adapted for the next sort of stage of development.
From Monocle in Tallinn, I'm Petri Burtsov.
Thank you to Petri. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Now, it's Friday, which means Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Muller has been hard at work unpacking the last 7 days for us. Here he is with this week's What We Learned.
We learned this week that money cannot buy everything. We learned specifically, indeed very specifically, that money cannot buy the Supreme Court of Wisconsin in an election to which a broadly liberal judge, Susan Crawford, defeated a conservative, Brad Schimmel, profligately backed by Earth's richest man and that kid in primary school nobody else told about their birthday parties, Elon Musk.
Meanwhile, Elon Musk has pumped more than $20 million into a Wisconsin election, going so far as to hand out $1 million checks to 2 voters yesterday. It made the race to fill a seat on the state Supreme Court the most expensive judicial election in American history.
We learned that Musk had indeed distributed 2 $1 million checks to 2 completely randomly chosen voters, though by incredible coincidence, one was chair of the Wisconsin Federation of Young Republicans.
No.
I'll be really?
Damned. Oh,
Whoa.
that blows my mind.
Really?
No way. Blow me down.
And we learned that the other will never be known by the nickname One Take, as her first swing at describing her glee.
My name's Ekaterina Diesler. I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I did exactly what Elon Musk told everyone to do. Sign a petition, refer friends and family, vote, and now I have $1 million.
Was swiftly deleted and replaced with...
My name's Ekaterina Diesler. I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I did exactly what Elon Musk told everyone to do. Sign a petition, refer friends and family, and now I have $1 million.
Especially bat-eared listeners will have noted that the second swipe omits the keyword vote, from which we learned that someone might now be gratifyingly worried about being seen to offer inducements for voting, which is not terrifically legal in Wisconsin, would be awful if any such test case ended up in front of its Supreme Court or anything. Anyway... We learned that, among other things, money may shortly not be able to buy in America is everything.
Likewise, an old-fashioned term that we use, groceries. I used it in the campaign. It's such an old-fashioned term, but a beautiful term, groceries. It sort of says a bag with different things in it.
Hey, he was just getting started. We learned, yes, of the details of the long-cherished global tariff regime of Elon Musk's second-in-command, US President Donald Trump. While these measures have, as of this recording, not lowered the price of anyone's weekly shop, they have substantially lowered the price of global stocks. So, swings and roundabouts. We learned, however, that geography may not be the president's strong suit. We are, as usual, as shocked as you are. We learned this from scrutinizing certain details of the United States tariff regime, which appears basically to boil down to this. For countries Trump quite likes, has never heard of, or doesn't care about, it's 10%. For most other countries, it is an entirely nonsensical number supposed to represent a given country's tariffs on the US. Though, to be clear, it absolutely doesn't. It appears to be American trade deficits with a given country divided by that country's exports to America, which is just not the same thing, or indeed a thing at all, generously halved.
I get it now. Righto, carry on.
But in the detail lurks not so much the proverbial devil as that guy shouting at bins in your supermarket car park.
European Union, they're very tough, very, very tough traders. You know, you think of the European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half. Vietnam, great negotiators, great people. They like me, I like them. The problem is they charge us 90%. We're going to charge them 46% tariff.
We learned, for example, that while Australia is among those fortunate nations getting off relatively lightly with 10%, Norfolk Island gets stung for 29% despite being part of Australia. We learned similarly of different rates for Reunion and France, which are also the same country. We learned of a 10% tariff on the British Indian Ocean Territory, which seems a little harsh, given that almost everyone who lives there are American military personnel stationed at the US Air Force Base on Diego Garcia. Most audaciously, we learned that a 10% tariff will henceforth be slapped upon everything the US imports from the Heard and McDonald Islands. Although after running the numbers, we, for one whimsical news review, are unconvinced this will prove much of a revenue raiser, on the grounds that the Heard and McDonald Islands export nothing, on the grounds that they are lived on by nobody. Maybe some penguins? We did learn, however, that one country which, despite, everything, does still export $3.5 billion worth of goods to the US annually will not be tariffed at all. Can you guess? Granted that Russia doesn't trade with the US as much as it once did, but it still trades considerably more with the US than, say, Madagascar, which got walloped with 47%. So we learned that while it's good news for Russian fertilizer merchants, it's less so for Malagasy cocoa growers. And yes, we looked those up. And sticking with the subject of chocolate-based produce, in the United Kingdom, we learned that one of its counties was taking the firmest possible line against a very particular species of miscreant. We learned that a gavel had descended heavily upon a ne'er-do-well, and we checked when this guy had done well, and it was Nair, who had pilfered 325 Cadbury's cream eggs from a petrol station in Peterborough. Hot chocolate. Get it?
I see. Sure, I get it now. Yeah.
We learned, yes, that police had scrambled to crack the case, whisked him off to prison. It was no yoking matter tantamount to poaching, etc. We learned that the scofflaw, and indeed scoff egg, had not merely been handed a suspended 12-week prison sentence, but had been banned from Cambridgeshire for 3 months. Although given that many, if not most, inhabitants of these islands regularly go more than 3 months at a stretch without visiting Cambridgeshire and consider such absences no great encumbrance, this is a punishment of debatable severity. Though it does usher us smoothly towards a punchline.
Oh no.
Shut up. Yes, he has been Expelled. Boo. From Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Many thanks to Andrew. You're with The Globalist. And it's time now to talk theatre with Matt Wolfe, who's a theatre critic at the International New York Times. Matt, the buzz in the theatre world right now is all about the Olivier Awards coming up on Sunday.
Yes, indeed. The Oliviers, these are London's equivalent to Broadway's Tony Awards. And who doesn't like a nice awards ceremony on an April evening at the Royal Albert Hall, this year hosted by Billy Porter and Beverly Knight. So it should be very gala.
And this kind of tilts towards the Royal Opera presentation of Festin.
Well, yes. And what's interesting to say, first of all, about the Oliviers is, unexpectedly, they also cover opera and dance, whereas the Tonys in New York just do theatre. And Festin, of course, the opera that is inspired by the Danish film, and there was a play of it at the Almeida years ago in London, was probably the best thing I've seen in London so far this year. So there were only a couple of opera categories, but one of them is for Outstanding New Opera Production. And if this Mark Anthony Turnage version of the Danish film doesn't win in that category, there is no justice. But the theatre categories, you have shows like Fiddler on the Roof nominated 13 times, and plays like The Years and Kyoto and Giant about Roald Dahl, which I think is probably the putative favorite. This is the one with John Lithgow playing a very cantankerous Roald Dahl who's brought up on charges of anti-Semitism. And the play, although set 40-odd years ago, feels very apposite to now. Lithgow, wonderful actor, who's been acting on stage for half a century, really gives it his all. And it's a show that is guaranteed to travel from here to Broadway.
Now, you mentioned the Almeida, and of course there is a wonderful slow burn of a production there. That's Ionesco's Rhinoceros.
Yes, Ionesco, great French-Romanian playwright absurdist, very much akin to Beckett and Albee. The response to this has been quite mixed, and I can see why. It's not for all tastes. I think theatre devotees will absolutely love it. It's very much a play of two halves. The first half sort of sets it up. It's kind of playful, comical, slightly cheeky. There's a narrator played by Paul Hunter who kind of welcomes us to the theatre, and he tells us we're going to be there for 4 hours, which we're not. And then and you go, well, this is all kind of larky, but where is it going? And then the play, which we know to be a kind of parable of incipient fascism and all sorts of rather weighty and apposite topics, again, delivers exactly that in the second half, where you have Sophie Dirisu, wonderful actor, playing a kind of everyman in this provincial French village who looks on as everyone in his midst turns into rhinos except for him. And of course, it sounds absurd. That's the whole point. Joshua Maguire, a brilliant British actor, is one of the leading people to be animalized, I suppose, to coin a word. And he does it incredibly brilliantly. His transformation scene is stunning. But really, the very end of the production, which is about resistance, about holding firm against the literal onslaught, is chilling even to recount it now.
Matt, you mentioned the Seagull there, and of course there is a production of that on at the moment at the Barbican.
Yes.
Tell us more.
Well, very, very starry. This is kind of the constellations have gathered for this one. It's Kate Blanchett, Tom Burke, Emma Corrin, the young Australian actor Cody Smith-McPhee, who was nominated for an Oscar a couple of years ago for The Power of the Dog. It's directed by Thomas Ostermeyer, who's a German director who, in fact, did a German language production of The Seagull a couple of years ago at the Schaubühne in Berlin. This production is in English, in a version by himself and Duncan Macmillan, the British playwright. I absolutely love Chekhov. He's probably my desert island playwright. And I always think with Chekhov, what you want at the end of the day, no matter what else, is to be emotionally polaxed. And that's what I wasn't with this production. It's got lots of isolated bits of brilliance. Kate Blanchett, of course, is very watchable as the preening, narcissistic Arkadna, the actress who unwittingly or maybe wittingly lays waste to the family in her midst. But at the end of the day, was I seared to the soul? Not really. I was very intrigued by the set, which looks like the play is set in a kind of a cornfield. And there's some interesting breaking of the fourth wall. At the very beginning, we get the actor Zachary Hart coming out like a kind of itinerant musician saying, who wants a bit of Chekhov? And we get quite a lot of Chekhov across 3 hours, but I wasn't seared to the soul the way I was hoping to be.
And who's Nina?
Oh, Nina is Emma Corrin, who was on the West End a couple of years ago in Orlando, non-binary performer, doing a very good job. Although, actually, I thought in this production, despite the star power, of course, of Blanchett, I was more taken with Cody Smith-McPhee as the kind of suicidal, spoiler ahead, Constantine, the young son who wants to be a playwright and who is up against his formidable mother, and Tom Burke, who, is having his own fast-rising career, playing Trigorin, who takes self-loathing to new extremes. And self-loathing is always worth watching in a Chekhov play.
Yeah. And just finally, before we go, Matt, as you say, this is star-heavy.
Yeah.
And once you get big names like that in a production, of course, it pushes the prices up, doesn't it?
Yes. I mean, Sarah Snook, who was on the West End last year in The Picture Dorian Gray, now on Broadway, where she's doing very well there. Tickets were many hundreds of pounds here, and there are even more hundreds of dollars there. Denzel Washington and Jake Gyllenhaal on Broadway, $921. Tom Hiddleston in the glorious Much Ado About Nothing at Drury Lane, which I absolutely loved. That's several £100s a ticket. I'm afraid if you don't get in early, the prices go up. It's dynamic pricing, and you just go with the flow. Now, the converse is if the production ends up tanking, then, you can get in for a bargain, but then is it?
But then you don't want to see it.
Then you don't want to see it, so it's not much of a bargain, is it? They would pay you to go.
Matt Wolf, thank you very much.
A pleasure.
Indeed. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Laura Kramer, Carlotta Rebello and Hassan Anderson, our researcher Francesca Gilks, and our studio manager Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing is live at midday in London. I'm going to be with you tomorrow for Monocle on Saturday, and The Globalists will return at the same time on Monday. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.